They laughed at me like I wasn't in the room, a hobby, not a real job, right in front of my cousins. I smiled, nodded, and wrote down every word. 2 months later, I invited the whole family back to the same dining room so they could hear what I had learned. The crystal glasses caught the light that evening, throwing tiny rainbows across the mahogany table where my parents held court. My mother's voice cut through the dinner conversation like a knife through butter, each word calculated to wound. My father's chuckle followed, deep and dismissive, the same sound that had punctuated every achievement I'd ever shared with them. My name is Emily Carter, and I've spent the last 12 years building something my parents could never understand, a career in documentary filmmaking that feeds my soul, even if it doesn't always feed my bank account the way they'd prefer. That Saturday evening in early October, I drove up to my parents' colonial house in Westchester, the same house where I'd grown up learning that success meant a corner office and a six-figure salary, nothing less. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the smell of burning leaves from the neighbors' yards. I parked my 10-year-old Honda between my cousin Brad's Tesla and my sister Sarah's Mercedes, already feeling the familiar knot forming in my stomach. Through the dining room windows, I could see them all gathered, the entire Carter clan, in their weekend casual that cost more than most people's formal wear. "Emily, darling, you're late," my mother Helen called out as I entered, her tone suggesting I'd committed a minor war crime. She air-kissed me, careful not to smudge her lipstick. We were just discussing Brad's promotion to partner, 35 and already making senior partner at Morrison & Associates. I offered my congratulations to Brad, who had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. My father, Mark, was already pouring wine, his Harvard class ring catching the light as he moved. And Sarah's husband just closed that deal with the Koreans, $40 million in revenue, he added, not looking at me. The dining room hadn't changed since my childhood, same mahogany table, same oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, same crystal chandelier that threw diamonds of light across the cream walls. I took my usual seat, the one with the slightly wobbly leg that no one else ever wanted. "So, Emily," Aunt Patricia began, her voice honeyed with false interest, "still making those little films?" Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. "She calls them documentaries," she said, making air quotes that felt like slaps. "Last month it was about homeless veterans. Very earnest. It actually won an award at the Portland Film Festival," I said quietly. My father's laugh boomed across the table. "An award. What did that pay? Sweetheart, can you make your rent with awards?" He turned to Uncle Richard. "She insists on living in some converted warehouse in Portland, calls it authentic. The project raised over $200,000 for veteran housing programs," I continued, my voice steady despite the heat rising in my cheeks. "That's nice, dear," my mother said, the same tone she'd used when I was 7 and showed her a finger painting. "But it's not exactly a career, is it? It's more of a—" She paused, searching for the perfect dagger. "A hobby. Something to do until you find a real job." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. My cousins shifted uncomfortably. Sarah studied her wine glass. Even Brad's wife, Emma, who I'd barely spoken to before, looked mortified. "You know," my father added, addressing the table more than me, "we paid for Columbia Journalism School thinking she'd work for the Times or CNN. Instead, she runs around with a camera bothering people about their problems. At 34, you'd think she'd have figured out that idealism doesn't pay mortgages." I felt something snap inside me, clean and sharp like a breaking bone. But I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. Instead, I pulled out my phone and, under the table, began typing every word into my notes app. Every dismissive laugh, every cutting remark, every moment they reduced my life's work to a punchline for their dinner party entertainment. "Maybe you could talk to Harold about getting her something at the foundation," Aunt Patricia suggested to my mother. "Grant writing, perhaps something stable." "We've tried." My mother sighed dramatically. "But Emily insists on being independent." The word dripped with disdain, as if independence was a character flaw to be corrected rather than a strength to be celebrated. I typed faster, my thumb flying across the screen. The following Monday morning, I sat in my home office, a converted bedroom in my Portland loft that my parents would certainly mock, staring at the notes I'd typed during that dinner. Each word still stung, but now they served a different purpose. They were fuel. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Nora Blake. We'd been roommates at Columbia, but while I went into documentary work, she'd taken a different path: private investigation. Her voice was groggy when she answered at 8:30 a. Emily Carter, as I live and breathe. What's got you calling this early? I need your help, I said without preamble. It's about my parents. There was a pause. The same parents who told you investigation work was unseemly when I started my firm. The very same? I'm listening. Next, I called Oliver Hayes, a lawyer who worked with Brightline Studios on our documentary contracts. He picked up on the first ring, always the early bird. Emily, perfect timing. I was just reviewing the veteran housing film contracts. Oliver, I need to ask you something unrelated to work. What do you know about accessing public records, corporate filings, charity organizations, that sort of thing? That's an interesting question. Everything okay? I'm researching something personal. Most of that information is public domain. FOIA requests, state corporation databases, IRS Form 990s for nonprofits. Why do you ask? I explained, carefully, that I was looking into some family business matters. Oliver, ever the professional, didn't pry but offered to send me links to the relevant databases. That evening, I began my excavation. My mother ran the Carter Family Foundation, a charity that ostensibly provided arts education grants. The IRS forms were public record, and what I found made my eyebrows rise. Administrative costs consuming 60% of donations. Grants that seemed to circle back to businesses owned by family friends. A suspicious pattern of donations that spiked right before tax season. I pulled out an old external hard drive from my closet, one I'd used for storing raw footage from various projects. Instead, I created a new folder, Truth Project. Into it went screenshots, downloaded PDFs, and spreadsheets I began building to track the money flow. My father's business dealings were harder to trace. Mark Carter ran a consulting firm, Carter Strategic Advisors, that specialized in facilitating partnerships between corporations and government contracts. The language on the website was deliberately vague, full of buzzwords that meant nothing. But I found something interesting in the state corporate filings, multiple DBAs doing business, as registered under slightly different names, all traced back to the same address. At 2A, ma'am. So, I was still digging when I found a news article from 3 years ago about a development project in Albany that had been investigated for bid rigging. My father's name wasn't in the article, but in the background of one photo, I could see him shaking hands with Julian Price, the developer at the center of the scandal. Price had walked away clean, but several city officials hadn't been so lucky. I called Nora the next morning. I need you to look into someone named Julian Price, I said, and his connection to my father. This is getting serious. Are you sure you want to go down this road? I thought about my mother's air quotes around documentaries, my father's booming laugh at my expense, the way they'd performed their mockery like dinner theater for the family. I've never been more sure of anything. All right, I'll need a retainer. Family discount $500 to start. Done. Over the next 2 weeks, I became obsessed. Every evening after finishing my actual work, I'd return to my investigation. I found property records showing my parents owned 3 rental properties they'd never mentioned, all under an LLC called MH Holdings. The tenants were interesting, all executives at companies that had received consulting contracts from my father's firm. One night, while searching through old emails I still had access to from a shared family cloud account they'd forgotten I was part of, I found a draft my mother had never sent. It was addressed to someone at the State Arts Council, recommending against funding for a youth music program in East Portland, the very program she'd publicly claimed to support at a charity gala I'd attended. They deserve better than false hope, she'd written. These children should focus on practical skills, not artistic fantasies. I stared at those words, seeing my own reflection in them. Is that what I had been to her? A false hope she needed to correct 3 weeks into my investigation. Nora called me at 11:45 p. with a breakthrough. "Emily, you're going to want to sit down for this," she said. "Julian Price. He's not just connected to your father. They're partners in a shell company called Riverside Consulting Group. And here's the interesting part. Riverside received 4 municipal contracts worth a combined $12 million over the past 5 years. That's not illegal, is it? Not on its own. But every single contract was approved by the same city planning commissioner, Harold Brennan. Guess who's listed as a donor to your mother's foundation? Harold Brennan. Bingo. And his wife received a $20,000 arts education grant from the Carter Family Foundation just 2 months before the biggest contract was approved. I felt my pulse quicken. This wasn't just hypocrisy, this was corruption. The kind of quid pro quo arrangement that destroyed careers and reputations. "There's more," Nora continued. "I pulled property records, your parents' rental properties. 2 of them were purchased from Price's development company at 40% below market value, the assessor who signed off on those valuations, another foundation grant recipient. The next morning, I met Oliver at a coffee shop in Pearl District. I'd asked him to come as a friend, not a lawyer, but old habits die hard. He reviewed everything with the meticulous attention that made him excellent at his job. "Emily, this is explosive, but you need to be careful. Some of this borders on criminal conspiracy. If you're planning what I think you're planning, I just want the truth out there," I said. "The truth can be a weapon. Make sure you're prepared for the blowback." That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from someone I hadn't heard from in years, Riley Jacobson, an investigative journalist who'd worked on one of my early documentaries about corporate pollution. She now worked for the Portland Tribune. "Emily, strange question, but has your father ever worked with Riverside Consulting Group? I'm following a thread about municipal contract irregularities, and that name keeps coming up." My heart raced. "Why do you ask?" "I've been tracking suspicious bidding patterns for months. Riverside always seems to know exactly what to bid, just under the competition. It's like they have inside information. What if I told you I might have documentation that could help your story?" There was a long pause. "I'd say we should meet. Tomorrow. Bring everything." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room, surrounded by printed documents, laptop open to spreadsheets I'd created tracking the money flows. It looked like something out of a conspiracy thriller, except it was my life, my family. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister Sarah. "Mom's planning another family dinner next month. Please try to make it. And maybe don't mention your work. It just upsets them." I almost laughed. Upset them. They had built their entire fortune on lies and backroom deals while mocking me for choosing honest work. The next day, Riley's eyes widened as she reviewed my documentation. "This is comprehensive. You've done professional-level investigative work here." "I make documentaries," I said simply. "Research is what I do. This could be a major story, front-page major, but I need more than documents. I need someone willing to go on record." "I'll do it," I said without hesitation. "Emily, this is your family we're talking about. Once this goes public, they stood in front of our entire family and called my life's work a hobby. They said I was playing at having a career. Meanwhile, they've been playing at being respectable while running what amounts to a sophisticated bribery scheme." Riley nodded slowly. "I'll need time to verify everything independently. My editor will want multiple sources, but if even half of this checks out, it will," I said. She studied me for a moment. "You know, most people would just have a fight with their parents and move on. I'm not most people. I'm someone who tells stories that matter, who brings truth to light. They never understood that about me. They never understood that when they were teaching me about leverage and strategic advantage at their dinner table, I was learning different lessons than they intended." Riley gathered the copies I'd made for her. "Give me 2 weeks. I'll have my team dig into every connection, verify every document. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. As she left, Oliver appeared from another table where he'd been sitting, ostensibly working on his laptop but really providing moral support. "You're really going through with this," he said. It wasn't a question. "They made their choices," I replied. "Now I'm making mine." 2 weeks later, Riley's first article appeared on page 3 of the Portland Tribune's Sunday edition. The headline was subtle but damning. "Questions arise about city contract awards to Riverside Consulting." My parents weren't named directly, but the details were specific enough that anyone in their circle would connect the dots. My phone rang at 7:15 a.m. It was my mother. "Emily, have you seen this garbage in the Tribune? They're making insinuations about your father's business. It's clearly a hit piece by jealous competitors." "I haven't seen it," I lied, staring at the article spread across my kitchen table. "Well, don't bother. It's all nonsense. Your father's already called his lawyer." "These people have no idea who they're dealing with." The irony of her statement wasn't lost on me. Neither did she. That afternoon, my father left me a voicemail, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Emily, call me back. That reporter, Riley Jacobson, isn't she someone you worked with? If you know anything about this, you better speak up now." I didn't call back. Instead, I met with Riley again. "Your parents are in damage control mode," she said. "They've issued a statement calling the article baseless speculation and threatening legal action. Let them. Everything you published is true." "I know. My editors want to run a follow-up. But we need something more concrete. The financial records you provided show suspicious patterns, but we need the smoking gun." That's when Nora called. "Emily, you need to hear this. I just got off the phone with a contact at the State Ethics Commission. They received a complaint about the Carter Family Foundation 3 months ago, but it was mysteriously withdrawn after a large donation was made to the commissioner's re-election campaign." "Who filed the original complaint?" "A former employee of the foundation, Margaret Torres. She might be willing to talk." Margaret Torres lived in a modest apartment in southeast Portland. When she opened the door, her eyes widened in recognition. "You're Helen's daughter, the filmmaker." "Yes, I'm here about the foundation." She hesitated, then let me in. Over tea, she told me everything. "I worked for your mother for 3 years. I believed in the mission, helping young artists. But then I started noticing things. Grant applications from qualified programs being rejected while money went to—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Connected individuals. When I raised concerns, your mother fired me, called me unsuitable for the foundation's vision." "Would you be willing to tell this to a reporter? I was threatened, Ms. Carter. After I filed that complaint, someone visited me, a man who said my immigration status might be reviewed if I continued causing problems. My papers are perfectly legal, but the threat was clear." Who was the man? Julian Price. My blood ran cold. This was deeper and uglier than I'd imagined. That evening, my cousin Brad called. "Emily, what's going on? Uncle Mark is calling everyone, trying to figure out who's leaking information to the press." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Come on, we all know you're the family rebel, but this is serious. He's talking about hiring private investigators." "Let him." "Emily. Brad, did you know about the shell companies? The rigged contracts. Silence. Then I suspected. But Emily, this is how business works. You don't understand because you're not in this world." "You're right. I'm not in that world." "I'm in the real world, where people face consequences for their actions." After I hung up, I made a decision. I called Riley. "I want to accelerate this. What would you need for a front-page story?" "Documents directly linking your parents to Price, evidence of the threats against Margaret Torres, and ideally, someone currently inside their organization willing to corroborate." "Give me 1 week." I spent the next days gathering everything. Oliver helped me understand the legal implications of what I'd found. Nora tracked down 2 more former employees willing to speak off the record, and then Unexpectedly, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. Ms. Carter, I work in your father's office. I've seen your documentary work and admire your integrity. There are things you should know. Meet me at Cathedral Park tomorrow at 3 p.m. The person who showed up was James Mitchell, my father's senior accountant. I've been keeping copies of everything for 2 years, he said, handing me a flash drive. I knew someday someone would ask the right questions. Your father is not a good man, Ms. Carter, but you already know that. Why help me? Because I have a daughter your age. If she had the courage to stand up for what's right, even against family, I'd be proud of her. The flash drive contained everything: emails, financial records, even recorded phone conversations that James had legally captured during conference calls he was party to. The evidence was overwhelming. There's going to be a family dinner next month, I told Riley when I delivered everything. I want the story to break the day before. You're sure? They humiliated me in front of everyone. They deserve to face the truth in the same venue. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, I sent out an invitation to the entire family via our group email chain. Dear family, I'd like to host a special dinner on November 20th to share some exciting news about my career. I know you've all been concerned about my future, and I want to show you what I've been working on. 7 p.m. At Mom and Dad's house, they've graciously agreed to let me use the dining room. Love, Emily. My mother called within minutes. Emily, darling, what's this about? You want to host a dinner here? I want to share something important with the family. You're always saying I should be more open about my work. Well, yes, but what kind of news? You'll see. Trust me. It's something worth celebrating. I could hear the suspicion in her pause, but the prospect of me finally announcing something respectable was too tempting for her to resist. All right. But Emily, please, nothing controversial. Your father is under enough stress with these ridiculous newspaper allegations. Of course not. This is purely about my career. So, I spent the next weeks preparing meticulously. Oliver helped me organize the evidence into a clear presentation. Nora assisted with creating a timeline that showed the pattern of corruption spanning 5 years. Riley agreed to hold the big story until the morning after the dinner, but small pieces would continue to drip out, keeping the pressure on. I also prepared packets, one for each family member who would attend. Inside were copies of key documents, photographs, and a USB drive containing everything digitally. At Oliver's suggestion, I also prepared a legal notice that would be delivered to my parents' lawyer simultaneously with my presentation, ensuring they couldn't claim ignorance later. The week before the dinner, I purchased a small projector and tested it in my apartment, practicing my presentation over and over. Each slide was designed for maximum impact financial records, emails, photographs of my father with Price, transcripts of recorded conversations. You're sure about this? Oliver asked during our final preparation session. Once you do this, there's no going back. They've spent my entire life telling me I'm playing at having a real career. Time to show them what real documentary work looks like. 2 days before the dinner, my sister Sarah texted, "Mom's been acting strange. She keeps asking what you're planning. Please don't do anything to embarrass them." I responded simply, just bringing some transparency to the family. The night before, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room at 3:30 a.m., surrounded by everything I'd gathered. The evidence was damning, comprehensive, undeniable. Part of me, a small part, wondered if I should just walk away, let the newspaper story run its course without my direct involvement. Then I remembered my mother's voice. It's more of a hobby. I remembered my father's laugh. Idealism doesn't pay mortgages. I remembered the looks of pity from my cousins, the embarrassment of being treated like a child playing dress-up in an adult's clothes. The morning of the dinner, Riley called. "Emily, I wanted to give you a heads up. We've got confirmation from 3 independent sources about the Price connection. The FBI might be getting involved based on interstate commerce violations. This is bigger than just city contracts. All the more reason to do this tonight. You know, once federal investigators get involved, your parents could face serious charges. They should have thought about that before they built their empire on bribes and threats. That afternoon, I loaded everything into my car, the projector, the packets, my laptop with backup files, and a small voice recorder for my own protection. I also brought a bottle of wine, an expensive Bordeaux I knew my father loved, a peace offering that would make my betrayal sting even more. At 5 p.m., I dressed carefully, the kind of conservative dress my mother always wanted me to wear, the kind that said respectable professional rather than artistic rebel. I wanted them to see me as they'd always wanted, right before I showed them who I really was. Oliver texted, "Legal notice will be delivered to their lawyer at exactly 7:30 p.m. Good luck." Nora sent, "You've got this. They deserve everything that's coming." Riley, "My editor is holding the front page for Sunday. This better be good." I texted back, "It will be." At 6:30 p.m., I drove toward Westchester, toward my childhood home, toward a reckoning 3 months in the making. In the passenger seat sat a box containing the truth about the Carter family empire. On my phone was a presentation titled "Documentary Evidence: A Portrait of Corruption." As I pulled into the driveway, I saw the familiar cars already gathering Brad's Tesla, Sarah's Mercedes, Uncle Richard's Lexus. They were all here for what they thought would be another family dinner, another opportunity to offer unsolicited advice about my failed career. They had no idea they were about to become the subjects of my most important documentary work yet. At 7:15 p.m., I stood up from my seat at the familiar mahogany table, tapping my wine glass with a spoon. The crystal rang out clear and sharp, silencing the conversation. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "As you know, you've all been concerned about my career choice. Tonight, I want to show you what a documentary filmmaker actually does." My mother smiled uncertainly. "Emily, dear, what is this about?" I connected my laptop to the projector I'd set up earlier, the screen illuminating against the cream wall where a family portrait usually hung. I'd removed it quietly while everyone was getting drinks. "This is about truth," I said, clicking to the first slide. The image that appeared was a photograph of my father shaking hands with Julian Price at what appeared to be a construction site. The date stamp showed 3 years ago. "What the hell is this?" my father demanded, starting to rise from his seat. "Sit down, Dad. We're just getting started." The next slide showed incorporation documents for Riverside Consulting Group, with both their signatures clearly visible. "For those who don't know," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "Riverside Consulting has received $12 million in city contracts over the past 5 years. Every single contract was approved by Harold Brennan, whose wife received a $20,000 grant from Mom's Foundation." "Emily, stop this immediately," my mother hissed. I clicked to the next slide, a spreadsheet showing the flow of money from the city to Riverside, from Riverside to various LLCs, and from those LLCs back to my parents' accounts. "This is called money laundering," I said conversationally. "I learned that term making my little films about corporate corruption." Brad's wife Emma gasped. Sarah had gone pale. Uncle Richard was frantically typing on his phone, probably calling his lawyer. The next slide was an email from my mother to Harold Brennan, discussing the arrangement and suggesting they meet somewhere discreet to discuss the next grant cycle. "That's private correspondence," my mother shouted. "You had no right. Actually, these were obtained legally through FOIA requests after someone tipped off investigators about your foundation's suspicious activity." I said, "Amazing what becomes public record during an investigation." I clicked again. This time, it was a recording James Mitchell had included audio files on his flash drive. My father's voice filled the room. "Price knows what to bid. We make sure of it. That's why he pays us 15% off the top. It's foolproof." My father lunged for my laptop, but Oliver stepped out from the hallway where he'd been waiting. "Mr. Carter, I'd advise against destroying evidence. The FBI already has copies of everything." "FBI?" Aunt Patricia shrieked. "Oh, yes," I said, pulling out the packets I'd prepared. "Each of you gets a copy. Consider it an early holiday gift. I began distributing them around the table. Most family members were too shocked to refuse. "You treacherous little bitch," my father snarled, his Harvard composure finally cracking. "I learned from the best," I replied. "You taught me about leverage. Remember, about strategic advantage. Well, here's mine." The next series of slides came rapid-fire property records showing the below-market purchases from Price's company, bank statements showing large deposits timed perfectly with contract approvals, photos of my parents at various charity events that were actually meetings with co-conspirators. "The reporter, Riley Jacobson, will be publishing the full story tomorrow morning," I announced. Front page. But I wanted you all to hear it first, the same way you all heard about my hobby that night 3 months ago. "You're destroying your own family," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "No," I corrected. "I'm documenting their crimes. There's a difference." I clicked to the final slide, a collage of my actual documentary work. Award ceremonies, screening venues, testimonials from people whose lives had been changed by the stories I'd told. "This is what I really do," I said. "I find the truth and bring it to light. You never respected it because it didn't make me rich, but at least I can sleep at night knowing I've never threatened anyone's immigration status, never bribed a public official, never built my success on the suffering of others." My mother stood, shaking with rage. "Get out of my house." "Gladly. But first, you should know that at exactly 7:30 p.m., which would be right now, your lawyer received formal notice that you're under federal investigation. The State Ethics Commission also reopened their investigation into the foundation. Oh, and the IRS is very interested in those property valuations." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Through the dining room window, we could see 2 black SUVs in the driveway. "That would be the FBI," Oliver said calmly. "They wanted to wait until after your presentation. Emily, professional courtesy." The room erupted in chaos. Aunt Patricia fainted. Uncle Richard was shouting about entrapment. Brad was trying to call his lawyer. My parents stood frozen, looking at me with a mixture of rage and disbelief. The Sunday Tribune's headline screamed across the front page, "Carter Foundation Scandal Federal Investigation Launched into Bribery and Money Laundering Scheme." Riley's byline sat beneath it, but my name appeared in the 3rd paragraph as the primary source who'd brought the evidence forward. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m. and didn't stop. Reporters, distant relatives, former colleagues from film projects, everyone wanted to know why I'd turned on my own family. I let them all go to voicemail. By noon, news vans lined the street outside my apartment building. Through my window, I could see reporters doing stand-ups with my building in the background. My landlord texted asking if everything was okay. I told him I'd be staying elsewhere for a few days. Oliver had anticipated this and arranged for me to stay at a corporate apartment his firm kept for visiting clients. As I packed a bag, my phone buzzed with incoming texts. "Sarah, you've destroyed everything. Dad's accounts are frozen. Mom's had to step down from 3 charity boards. Are you happy now?" Brad, "My partners are discussing whether my association with the family creates a liability for the firm. Thanks for that." Cousin Jennifer, "My kids are being harassed at school because of what you did." I turned off my phone. That evening, alone in the sterile corporate apartment, I finally allowed myself to feel the weight of what I'd done. The righteous anger that had sustained me for 3 months was fading, replaced by something hollow and cold. I'd won, hadn't I? So why did victory taste like ash? The next morning, Oliver stopped by with coffee and news. "Your parents have hired Kellerman and Associates, top white-collar defense firm in the state. They're going to fight this hard. Let them—" "Emily, you need to prepare yourself. They're going to come after you too. Claim you stole documents, invaded privacy, defamed them. It's going to get ugly." "It already is ugly." He studied me with concern. "When's the last time you ate a real meal?" I couldn't remember. That afternoon, Nora came by with Thai food and her laptop. "You need to see this," she said, pulling up a video on social media. It was my mother, standing outside their house, talking to reporters. She looked haggard, aged 10 years in 2 days. "My daughter is mentally unstable," she was saying. "She's been jealous of our success for years. These allegations are fantasies created by a disturbed mind seeking attention." I laughed, but it came out bitter. Mental instability, that's their play. "It won't work," Nora assured me. "The evidence is too solid. The FBI doesn't launch investigations based on fantasies." But the damage was spreading. My professional Facebook page was flooded with comments, some supporting me, others calling me a traitor, a snake, worse. Someone had found photos from family Christmases and posted them with captions like, "Before she destroyed them," and "Money meant more than blood." Riley called that evening. "Emily, I need to warn you. Your parents' lawyer has filed an injunction trying to stop us from publishing follow-up stories. They're also threatening to sue you personally for theft and intentional infliction of emotional distress." "They inflicted plenty of distress at that dinner 3 months ago." "I know, but you need to be prepared for a long fight." Wednesday brought more revelations. The FBI had expanded their investigation to include 3 other city officials and 2 more businesses connected to Price. The story was growing beyond my parents, becoming a web of corruption that stretched throughout the state government. Margaret Torres, the former foundation employee who'd been threatened, called me that afternoon. "Ms. Carter, I wanted to thank you. What you did took incredible courage." "I'm not sure it was courage," I admitted. "Maybe just rage." "Sometimes they're the same thing. Your parents. They hurt many people, not just employees. Grant applicants who were rejected because they didn't have connections, communities that needed those resources. You gave us all a voice." Her words should have comforted me. But sitting alone in that anonymous apartment, watching my family's destruction play out on the evening news, I felt nothing but exhaustion. Thursday morning, James Mitchell, my father's accountant who'd provided the crucial evidence, sent me a message through Oliver. "You did the right thing. History will remember that, even if your family won't." But what good was history when my phone gallery still held pictures of happier times, birthday parties, graduations, holiday dinners where the smiles were real, before I knew what lay beneath the surface of my parents' success? Sarah showed up at the corporate apartment Thursday evening. Oliver had given her the address, thinking I might need family contact. She stood at my door, her usually perfect appearance disheveled. "They're saying Dad might go to prison," she said without preamble. "He might. Mom's having panic attacks. She's on medication now." I said nothing. Was it worth it? "Emily, was proving your point worth destroying our entire family?" I stood at the window of the corporate apartment, watching the rain streak down the glass, distorting the city lights below into abstract patterns. It had been a week since the dinner, since I'd detonated the bomb I'd so carefully constructed. The debris was still falling. In my hand was the same phone where I'd typed those frantic notes 3 months ago, documenting every cruel word, every dismissive laugh. The notes were still there, though I didn't need to read them anymore. They were burned into my memory like scar tissue. "They laughed at me," I said aloud to the empty room, repeating the words that had become my mantra. "So I just what destroyed them sought justice told the truth. All of the above. Maybe. Or none of it." I thought about documentary filmmaking, the craft they'd so thoroughly dismissed. Every documentary I'd ever made was about finding the truth beneath the surface, about giving voice to the voiceless, about pulling back the curtain on systems of power. But I'd never expected to turn that lens on my own family. Or maybe, deep down, I always knew it would come to this. The hollow feeling in my chest wasn't satisfaction or regret, it was something more complex, a recognition that some victories cost more than they're worth. But you pay the price anyway because the alternative is accepting your own diminishment. My parents had taught me about power, though not in the way they'd intended. They'd shown me how it corrupts, how it builds walls of justification around cruelty, how it makes you believe your success justifies others' suffering. They'd taught me that reputation matters more than truth, that wealth excuses all sins, that family loyalty means accepting your place in the hierarchy. But I'd learned different lessons from behind my camera. I'd learned that truth has its own power, patient and inexorable, that stories matter more than money, that integrity isn't a luxury you indulge in after you've made your fortune, it's the foundation you build on, or everything eventually crumbles. My reflection in the window looked ghost-like, translucent, as if I was already fading from this story. And maybe I was. The investigation would continue without me. The trials, if they came, would proceed whether I watched or not. The family would reconstruct itself around the crater I'd created, with new narratives about what had happened and why. Sarah had asked if it was worth it. The answer changed depending on the hour, the memory that surfaced, the weight of solitude. At 3 a.m., when I woke to the phantom sound of my father's dismissive laughter. Yes, it was worth it. At sunset, when I remembered teaching my niece to use a camera last Christmas, the answer was less clear. But clarity wasn't what I'd been seeking that night 3 months ago when they'd turned my life's work into dinner entertainment. I'd been seeking something more primitive respect, maybe, or just the simple acknowledgement that my chosen path had value. Instead, I'd found something else, the terrible freedom that comes from burning bridges you can never rebuild. They'd called it a hobby, not a real job. But here's what they never understood. Documentary work isn't about the prestige or the money. It's about bearing witness. It's about ensuring that stories aren't buried under comfortable lies. It's about choosing difficult truths over easy complicity. And in the end, that's what I'd done. I'd borne witness to their corruption, documented their crimes, and chosen truth over family comfort. Whether that made me a hero or a traitor depended on who was telling the story. But this was my story to tell, and I'd told it the only way I knew how, with evidence, with receipts, with the unforgiving clarity of someone who'd spent years learning to see past surface presentations to the reality beneath. The rain continued to fall, washing the city clean, or at least giving the illusion of cleanliness. Tomorrow, there would be more calls from reporters, more legal documents to review, more family members to avoid. But tonight, in this anonymous room, I sat with the knowledge that I'd done what I'd set out to do. They'd laughed at me like I wasn't in the room, reduced my life's work to a punchline, performed their cruelty for an appreciative audience. So I'd simply returned the favor, with interest. The projection of their crimes on that dining room wall had been my finest documentary work, not because of its technical merit or artistic value, but because it had done what all good documentaries do. It had changed the story. And sometimes, changing the story is the only revenge worth taking. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Please drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about Emily's choice. Was she justified in exposing her parents, or did she go too far? I read every comment and would love to hear your perspective on family, loyalty, and the price of truth.